Sorry to disturb y'all's conversation. We're going to go on and get started on our workshop Tuesday, June 17th, 2025, 5 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. Call to order. Declaration of a quorum, back to six members present, but we'll be back when we reconvene later on. Welcome, everybody. Thank y'all for being here. Item C1, public hearing. We're going to open up our public hearing notice. And we have not had anybody sign up to speak on the public hearing, so we will now close that, which closes item C2, right?
She'll go ahead and present.
Oh, yeah, she got to present for. Sorry, Heather. Ms. Wilson, come on. Appreciate it.
Mr. Horvick, thank you for giving me the opportunity, Dr. Harkrider and Board of Trustees. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to do a public hearing. Of course, we've gone over this several times and we've had several workshops pertaining to the budget. So this is going to be a little bit more condensed. But if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. So the things we're going to go over today are just the legally adopted budgets. That's your child nutrition, your debt service, and your general fund. And by law, we're required to adopt these by July 1st, no later than, or we cannot expend anything. Therefore, we can't pay anybody. So that's kind of important that we kind of get this done in June. We'll start with the child nutrition budget, and this is just kind of the highlight. We didn't increase any of the student meals at this time. We did lose some funding on our child nutrition program because we were getting about $500,000 a year for supply chain things from COVID, and we're no longer receiving those funds. So you're going to see a little bit of decrease in revenue. Ms. Scott Goodlett worked really hard to try to decrease her expenditures to meet that revenue. So you'll kind of see that. We'll kind of look at it really closely this year. We're hoping not to have to increase our meal cost, but we haven't done that in many, many, many years. The staff raises that are in this plan are based on Plan F. That does not mean that we have to adopt Plan F. What that means is I've done the worst case scenario that we're looking at, okay? So that's the highest that we're proposing. And so this is what we're looking at here. So child nutrition funds, we're proposing $9,799,684 in revenue and the same amount in expenditures for a balanced budget. So you can really see where there's an increase in, there's a decrease in local revenue, an increase in federal funds. That's typical. And then, of course, we've had to decrease our child nutrition program. The other one there is our water, utilities, and things, and that is a decrease in the budget as well, just based on historical information. Do we have any questions about the child nutrition?
Just a very quick one, because you put change in fund balance on there. Do we keep a fund balance for the child nutrition part of the budget?
Yes, we do.
A similar percentage?
Yes, yes.
Is it included on the big number that we look at?
It is not included on the
Okay.
big number at all. There used to be a 6-month requirement that you can hold over that much in fund balance, and they've decreased that. So we don't have that requirement any longer to spend that down as much. So we do really well there. The positive is through COVID and feeding all kids with federal funds, you get a higher reimbursement rate on feeding a economically disadvantaged child than you do a regular paid child. You get more funding. And so because of that, we were able to have a great fund balance. Does that make sense? All right, so we'll move on to the debt service fund. So with the debt service fund, right now we're proposing the 23.7 cents. That's what we did the previous school year, and we're hoping to hold it at that rate. That rate is what went to the newspaper at this time. If we have to increase that rate higher, we'll have to go back and put it in the paper again, okay, before we adopt a tax rate. The crazy thing about the debt service right now is the hold harmless. That was from Senate Bill 4, I believe, where we're going from 100,000 to 140,000. There's some other legislation that passed that you can't defease debt, or you can't increase a tax rate high enough to defease debt. Does that make sense? So what they're trying to do is if you increase your tax rate to defease debt, they decrease your hold harmless amount. So you can play with the debt, but you're really kind of stuck there. I know that's really confusing. I looked at it several different ways, and every time I would increase my tax, it would decrease my hold harmless. So we'll kind of monitor that. Once we get our certified numbers, we can really look at that a lot harder, and then we'll probably have an amendment to the budget. Okay? There are some other things, and I'm going to go ahead and just show you what this looks like, because the first time I looked at it, I was a little taken back. So our proposed budget is a $2 million deficit in the debt service fund. That totally has to do with timing, because we changed our fiscal year. And so what we're doing right now is we're collecting taxes for a February of 26 and an August of 26 payment. We're expending our expenditures on an August of 2025 payment and February 2026. So what's going on here is our payment in August of 25 is higher than our payment in August of 26. Now, if I increase my tax rate to kind of drop that down, I'll lose my hold harmless. And so you almost have to increase your tax rate more than $3.5 million, which is in hold harmless right now, to get that to do anything. And so we'll continue to monitor that. It's a complete timing issue. So what questions do y'all have? I mean, I know that is extremely confusing.
So, I mean, the 2.1 million that is showing a deficit there, so it is only temporary, but it would come out of our fund balance, the part that is set aside for.
It comes out of fund balance, but that's a great point, because what's going to happen this year is we levy taxes to pay for February and August of 25. So that money, a large fund balance is going to increase in your debt service fund, okay? And then that's to pay your August of 25 payments. Then we're levying this tax to pay our August of 26 taxes. So our fiscal years no longer line up. In addition to that, TEA looks at our debt payments when they're figuring our hold harmless based on February of 26 and August of 26. And our expenditures are on a different time frame. We're changing our fiscal year. Yeah. Well, no, it's happening. Yes, it happened because we changed our fiscal year, but this is something that we're going to face with. If you level your debt out, and once you level your debt out and you're not seeing huge fluctuations, you're not going to see this. But since there's over a $3 million difference between the 2025 and the 2026 payment, we're getting hit here. Okay, does that make sense? I probably should have just said it like that. Sorry,
Thank
I'm
you for
confusing
understanding
everyone
these
tonight.
complicated things.
Well, no, it's fine. It's just when I looked at it the first time, I was like, yes, absolutely. Now it's not going to look
We'll be geniuses next year.
well. Or have to do another explanation of why we're putting money in fund balance. That's for sure. Okay, so then here's the general fund. So there's a few things that are happened here. Since we put the paper notice, so when we did our public notice, I gave this to you guys. It was based on current law, okay? However, since then, they've come out with the new compressed rates, which are higher than what they were last fiscal year, okay? So we put it in the paper at 68.22 versus 69.69, which is what it is figuring right now based on my preliminary numbers, not my certified numbers, okay? When our certified numbers come out, they're gonna be based on 140,000 homestead exemption versus 100,000 homestead exemption. So to get my preliminary numbers were a lot higher than 5%, but we built everything based on 5% just to try to take into account the change between 100,000 and 140, and I feel pretty comfortable about that. Now, if they come in higher, we're going to be able to compress that tax rate a little bit more because we're not compressing to the floor. And most people in the state have been compressing their tax rate to the floor, but however, the entire state only grew 5.7% in property values was what's being estimated. So our compressions are a lot different this year than they have been in the past. Therefore, it's almost going to take an 11% increase to get you compressed to the floor. So we're probably not going to get there this year. So we're going to be in between there. So right now, we're going to just sit right now until we have our our certifying numbers. And then of course I have to submit those into TEA, and TEA tells me where I set my tax rate. But what will happen is, if you remember the cups, and I tell you, okay, if I have state funding, then I'm gonna have less local funding. What'll happen is we'll have to do a budget amendment once we have those, because our buckets should be the same. We just might have to decrease tax, increase state revenue, and move some things around like that, okay? Okay, so there's that first hit. We are budgeting a decline in enrollment. We were estimating a 4% going into this school year. Of course, we lost students this school year, plus we anticipate to lose a few more students going into the next school year. So there is a decline in the budget. So if you were looking at House Bill 2 runs and comparing it to what I have, you might think they have a little bit more revenue, but they're anticipating us to have more students than we do because they don't have our actual revenue, our actual PEMS records right just yet to show where we ended this school year. Okay, so then they'll start making some of those adjustments. The staff raises are based again on Plan F. That means that's the highest raise that we have in our runs. So if it's less, that's fine. We can do a budget amendment. And then the revenues and expenditures are budgeted on current interpretation of a House Bill 2. And so we're still looking through everything, and we feel comfortable with what we're presenting, but TEA is still giving us guidance on what the legislation passed. Okay, we had some as close as last week. We had some guidance come out on the salaries, so we're still working through everything. Any questions?
Two quick things. The .6822 has our eight golden pennies in it,
Yes,
right?
ma'am, it
So
does.
it would be whatever the
Yeah,
floor is
it's
plus the-
6022, and then it's 6169.
And then the 140, I mean, you're saying you're working the calculations in that. Doesn't that have to go officially to the voters? Is that true?
The
or-
140, I don't believe has to.
It's not going to. Okay, I couldn't, somebody,
The
But I thought, well, the-
65,000 has to go to the voters.
okay.
Yeah. And the 65,000 is those that are 65 and older.
Got it.
That
All
has
right.
to go to the voters.
Okay, so this is coming. Thank y'all for.
Can you remind me again, when do you get your certified?
July 25th. Okay. All right. So this is really kind of going through. I just wanted to touch real quick based on kind of where our savings were this year to kind of put it back in place. We reestablished staffing models. We just made a few adjustments there, really trying to get those classrooms to 22-1 for our elementary, 25-1 for our intermediate, middle school, and high school. That was really our goal there. And so that's where you're seeing a majority of those savings. So of course, we had some increases just for the minutes to cover our minutes and sped. The increase in campus budgets, we increased their budgets by $75,640. Most of that savings came from the central office where we were taking things from central and moving it back to the campuses. We reviewed zero-based budgets. We have some contingencies in here for curriculum. We have some additions for ESSER loss, and then we have some contingencies for, of course, our attendance incentive, and then for a financial software. So those contingencies plus our increase in custodial supplies due to the loss in ESSER comes to about $866,000. Then we had some savings across the board when we look at different departments, just where we could save money per student funding in different departments, as well as just looked at everything. We decreased training in some places. We moved things around. We looked at savings that we could receive based on temps and overtime pay and things like that. So that was about another $799,000 savings. And then, of course, we reduced that $400,000 for departmental budgets. The other thing I want to discuss before we go into the budget is compensation and what we're looking at. Of course, what is built in this budget is House Bill 2 retention on every plan. What we've done is set aside the money for teachers with $2,500 as we understand those to be today for 3 to 4 years. And those that are $5,000 for classroom teachers, we've got 5+ years that get $5,000. That was based on Texas Education Code 5.001 when the legislation met. When TEA came out with their guidance, they said an 087 teacher is what qualifies for this, which is typically what we know as a classroom teacher. And that's a PEMS code that we'll be submitting into TEA, and that's how we'll receive our funding. The other allotment we receive for staffing is $45 for regular program allotment that can be used on these type positions. The only thing that cannot be used on is administrative. So we can't use any of that additional funding on administration. That funding is about $515,000 for our district. So we have 6 proposed plans, but to make it easy, I've kind of broke it out into 2 plans because the teachers are the same on 3, and then 4 through 6 in a sense. So A through C, and then D, E, and F. So A through C are House Bill 2 raises for classroom teachers based on their experience. So it goes back to House Bill 2. If they have 3 or 4 years, they get the 25. If they have 5 above, they get 5,000. Our district then said that if you are 1 and 2, you get 25 at least. So we kind of made that right for them. It increases a 0-year teacher from 51,750 to 52,250. And then 2,500 for all other employees. And so those are the employees that they're not qualifying as 087 records or classroom teachers. So that's going to be our librarians, our nurses, our dyslexia, ESL, enrichment, our instructional coaches, things like that. This plan would give them the $2,500. Then the other plans, pay families, which is your administrative pay scale, your auxiliary pay scale, and your clerical pay scale, are all based on the following. It would be a 3% midpoint, the 5.8 million, 4% is the 6.4, and 5% is the 6.8. Okay? So that's if you would go with plan A through C. And this is the cost on that plan. Now, there was a little bit of movement on teachers, librarians, and nurses because the first time we looked at it, we did it based on a percentage. But then when we came back and started looking at it further, we just made it all House Bill 2 eligible. Okay? So it moved a little bit on the cost. Here is when you look at D through F, you're looking at $2,500 for your base pay, and that's 1 to 4 years, and $5,000 for any teacher 5 years or older, or over in experience. The beginning teacher pay would move from 51,750 to 52,250. Of course, we would cover the TIA in this the budget as well as any market changes. And again, that 3% would be at 6.1, 4% 6.696, and your 5% would be at $7 million to do a 5% raise. Again, that budget, these are the costs. So if you did the 5% raise for the pay families and then $2,500 for teachers 1 through 4 and teachers 5 and over in experience, it would be the $2.1 million deficit to the budget. That is what is built into the current budget. So I wanted to break it out a little bit. So just what our increases and decreases are. So this is just looking at per object code classification, and you can kind of see where we had increases and decreases across the board. And then further, I wanted to break it down by your local, state, and federal. Of course, once we have our certified numbers, you'll see some movement between the state and local revenue there. The rest is kind of set. Based on current understanding of House Bill 2. I do want to say that because we could find some other things out that could adjust revenue up or down. If you look at your student-related expenditures, we're up $3.8 million, and then all other expenditures, including your maintenance and operation expenditures, were up $993,000 per this budget. Total expenditures increased $4.8 million. Of course, over $7 million of that would be the 5% raise if that was what was adopted. The other sources, of course, that is our flood at Pebble Creek. We just have a few items that have not come in yet, and so that's a little bit of change from the last time because I need to set some money aside to cover those expenditures in the next school year. That's the little $4,000 there that they just haven't received everything. And so there's your difference. We want to talk about fund balance, and so when you look at this money and you look at the expenditure of the previous budget, we're really close. $39 million is what we would need. We anticipate adding about $6 million to that unassigned fund balance that currently is at 38.5. If we were to add $6 million to the fund balance this school year with the 10-month versus 12-month budget, that would give us about 2 years to be able to reduce the budget to get it under control. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Can you remind me of the increase in salaries? I like that you put a few slides up where you the expenditure budget showing for between last year and proposed for next year, that 5.4 million. How much of that do you know the number of how much was directly funded from House Bill 2? How much is the state how much of that is actually coming from the state, and how much else are we going to have to try to, put in to meet that? Do you happen to know that? I can't.
Yes. So we get 515 for one of the funding, and right now it's sitting about 3.5 million for the other. So
Okay.
You're looking at a little
About
over $4 million.
of that.
Some of the runs go as high as $4.4 million for additional funding. It's going to depend on those final decisions on what qualifies as a classroom teacher and what doesn't. So that's going to be some of it as well. And then there's another thing out there where they have caught on. I was hoping that they wouldn't, but they have caught on to the fact that some of our teachers, 29, I believe, are funding from federal programs. And so I think they're going to catch us there where they might not give us the funding for those teachers. That's going to be 100% absorbed by our federal grants. And I hate if that's the case because that just means that that's less money that we can spend out of local funding, and that could hurt us a little. But they have not made a decision on what they're going to do with our federally funded teachers.
So depending on the raise, a little over 3 million, we would be funding. So basically a potential deficit if you went with Plan F, the 2.1 million deficit would be basically all money given to staff and raises.
There is some, I do want to point out, there are some one-time expenditures in the budget. And so when you look at that 8, there's about $500,000 sitting there, or just one-time expenditures. And I always kind of like to bring that up because that's something you hope will decrease in the upcoming years.
Are we pretty confident as far as, the House Bill 2 funding that we're going to get based upon the teachers' years of experience?
Yeah. Okay, so there will be some adjustments there, but then it'll be adjustments in the teacher salaries as well. So where we are at this time, because we're adopting a July 1 budget, we have movements in and movements out. And so what will happen is it'll be based on snapshot. So what we turn in on snapshot of years of experience of those teachers as well as the count of them is how we'll get our funding, is what they said. So where we are in October. So we'll have a few retired teachers that will be moving out and younger teachers will be moving in. So there'll be some fluctuations in revenue there as well as expenditures, if you want to know the truth. Because when you adopt a July 1, we haven't hired everybody, we haven't put them on, we don't know their years of experiences, and so usually you receive a little bit of savings on that because you've got some of your older teachers with more experience and then you're hiring some younger ones. And that's going to fluctuate where you are on that scale.
And Josh, we're not making any assumptions. We're going basically off the guidance, like on the coding of the teachers. So we've followed everything. Some districts were going out instead of putting that additional money for teachers into the pay scale. They were wanting to put it into stipends because technically it's an allotment that could go away, so it's not in technical law. And then we received guidance, I think I sent you guys Friday. We had planned on putting it in the scale. The guidance came and said, yes, it had to be in the scale. So we've kind of followed and hadn't made any, we've kind of, I guess, probably more than likely done worst case scenario of how it would impact us financially versus best case.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of Senate bill runs out, and so I've looked at every single one of them. But then I've counted every one of our teachers on each step. So I haven't looked at their guidance in a sense of just to make sure my number's higher than their number, when you're backing into the numbers, so that we don't get caught anywhere. So hopefully that'll be the case. A lot of the guidance that's still to come is stuff that we really don't have in the House bill runs yet, because they're holding back on how this might affect because they don't know how it'll affect. There's just a couple of them in there where we've got to know how many kids qualify for intervention because they've failed the STAR test. That's a number, it's a fluctuation number that we don't have any historical information on, in a sense, financially wise. The other number that's in there is interventions, because we'll get $1,000 per SPED intervention, and we're going off of what we anticipate our interventions to be. But those numbers we'll be pulling in the future and then getting a better idea. But those are still small allotments going into the big picture. The biggest allotments, of course, is your $55 in your basic allotment, your $106 based on enrollment, and then your $55 based on ADA for your additional funding. But like I said, those are such small per student allotments, and they're pretty set.
Isn't there some sped money that we won't get till the next year too?
Yes, ma'am.
That could really help us out?
Yes, we will get additional sped money in the next year. However, if you remember when we started talking about this and they were taking that guaranteed yield out, we're going to lose some of that money. It looks like the sped funding's going to be higher than what we're going to lose, but you're not going to see that huge increase. Like if they anticipate us to get $1 million, we're still going to lose a large portion when they held our guaranteed yield and they upfronted our money this year with the full $55 in the basic allotment. And some of the allotments you'll see kind of go up, but if you remember that $55 increase in basic allotment, it'll increase how much money you get in SPED a little bit, how much you get in dyslexia, because it all goes off that formula.
I feel like we've been looking at this for a long time. You've been looking at this a lot, but just from the perspective of those who might be listening and trying to understand, what we're come down to today that we've been looking at for a little while here, we've got a situation where classroom teachers, specific definition of classroom teacher, is going from the state to get these 2,500 or 5,000 if they've reached a certain amount of experience. And we as a district are trying to see how do we bring everybody else into that, and not just those that are on the classroom teacher pay scale, but then our other staff as well. And I think it's just important to note that these three categories, like there's the three columns that you have when you're talking about plans A through C and D through F. You've got classroom teachers, the others who are on the teacher pay scale, and then all other staff. But give us some examples of who are in that all other staff, if you don't mind.
Okay, so are we talking about all other staff for teachers, or are we talking about
No,
all
that
assistant
third column
admin?
where it's 3, 4, or 5%. I just think it's good for clarity for us to understand. We might make assumptions about what that column is, but could you
Okay.
give us some examples?
Okay, so when you're looking at the different groups here, clerical and professional is all clerical and professional, okay? Auxiliary, when you're looking at auxiliary, so if you're looking at aides and things like that, you're gonna be clerical, professional. If you're looking at a secretary, an aide, a LVN, a receptionist, a registrar, an attendance clerk, that's really going to be your category there. Your auxiliary staff are your bus drivers, your custodians, your maintenance guys, your food service cafeteria workers, and employees like that. Your administrative professional staff is your APs, your principals, your counselors, your ARD facilitators, your nurses, your DIACs, your LVNs, your admin here in Central, gosh, I don't know if I'm missing anybody, but there's your
any other
director of maintenance,
Directors, correct.
your director of custodial, it's a huge pay family.
Right, and
And
so
it's all on one pay scale.
Right, I just think it's good for us to point out. We've got a lot of people that are in those categories that don't fall on that teacher, pay scale that we're also talking about trying to give raises to. And so, yeah, I just wanted that to kind of come out into, like, here's what we're talking about on these three different
Coordinators
columns.
are on that, assistant
Yeah.
directors are on that.
I want to remind y'all too, we've got several different categories on the teacher pay scale that aren't part of House Bill 2. So when we gave you the scenarios of the 2,500 and the 5,000, all of those folks that are on that teacher pay scale are getting that number, not just those that qualify. That's where the roughly $3 million we make up to create equity.
That would be the D, E, and F.
Yes, ma'am.
Right,
Yes.
yeah.
That was
that's kinda
something,
what I-
well, it's something we've talked about as a team. We talked about it Friday during the special meeting. In my opinion, there's not one group of employees that's more important than the other. It takes all of us and their role in our district. And so I've never, as a superintendent, proposed different raises for different staff members. Equity is huge. And like I told you then, I think we've got an opportunity to really jump out there and close some of our scales, some of the gaps that we currently have, and continue to make us an attractive option.
Jeff, are we talking, obviously, we're not voting here during this, but are we going to talk about where we're going to land now or during the board meeting?
You can discuss now. I mean, if you want to, I'd be more comfortable if you're discussing where you are to wait until we got an action item in front of us. You got questions about the plans, I think now's the best time to talk about it. But
Clarifying questions.
correct. But when we got the action in front of us, I think at that point, probably be more appropriate.
Okay. Back to next steps here. We'll adopt the tax rate in August of 2025 or September. We can adopt it in September. It would be probably the latest time, but then we'll also bring a budget adjustment back in those months as well. in August and September and just kind of sum everything up once we get some final numbers. Are there any questions? All right, thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Do we want to close the public hearing too?
Close the public hearing. Sounds good. No one signed up to comment, so we're good there. Item D, no hearing of citizens for the workshop. Brings to item E1, SB 401.
Yeah, we've got a couple items for workshop. These won't take very long. There is a change in Senate Bill 401. Senate Bill 401 dealt with homeschool students being able to participate in UIL activities in public schools. So prior to this year, in 24-25 school year, a school district had to take action as a board to opt in to allowing homeschool students to participate in our UIL activities. There was a change in the 89th legislative session. And so as a district, a board of trustees has to take action by September 1 of 2025 that you opt out of homeschool students participating in UI activities. If a board takes no action by September 1 of 2025, homeschool students are eligible to participate in all of our UIL activities. So I'm putting this before you today. We had some speakers about a year ago about homeschool students being allowed to participate. At that point in time, we really didn't have a lot of discussion on it. I don't think most folks on the board had an appetite for that. So just bringing it to your attention, we will bring this forward at the July meeting for action on Senate Bill 401. Got any questions? We can talk through them right now.
I guess it's important to note, we don't get funded on those kids. We let them participate in our sports, but we're not getting money. So I
Correct.
don't think people understand that. They don't understand why we're not
Right,
allowing it.
not necessarily funding for students. You know, I've always had I think we've got a great school district. If our band, choir, football, theater is good enough, then our classroom should be good enough. That's just where I personally sit on it. There's not a lot. I've tried to do a quick search. I've seen a number at one point in time, roughly 50 districts out of the 1,200 in the state had allowed the participation. So it has not been, it was an interesting change because you had to make a decision to allow it to happen, and you had less than, you know, not even a tenth of the districts that had taken that action. So now you've got to opt. It was just it's an interesting change in the law that to me was unnecessary, but it is what it is.
Mine is not near as complicated as Heather's, so thank goodness. Okay, we have 6 policies we will be voting on, not this board meeting, but in July, local policies. First one being, a lot of them are board-related, the BDAA, and that just aligns the district with practices and to clarify board officers that when they serve and how long they serve and that kind of thing. It's very, very clear in the policy. Any questions about that?
Chris, could I ask just a general question before? I mean, I know obviously the legal stuff we have to do because the legal policy updates because they're the law, so we have to accept those. So on these local ones, I know usually you're getting some kind of recommendation out of TASB to make a change. Were all these driven by something coming out of TASB, or are they some of them just some things that locally we've looked at and want to change, or are they just what's driving some of the changes, I guess, besides just maybe some cleanup?
It varies. Sometimes we, as a district, decide we want to look at our local policy and change some things, and sometimes it's driven by policy. There are several things in here we were already doing that are now being voted on as local policy. So it just varies. It depends on what it is. But there are times when we decide we want to look at legal and see if we can do something locally a little differently. And then I have to run that through TASB, and they run it through legal, and then they draw it up for me in proper policy, and then I bring it to workshop, and then all districts don't bring it to workshop first. We always bring it to workshop first and let you ponder it and then vote on it the next meeting, but that's kind
This
of been our.
update was not driven by us. If we have an update that's driven by us, we'll bring it to you under separate cover. Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of what I'm asking. So for these specifics,
Correct.
they were kind of just the, I know
Yes.
that every once in a while we just get recommendations on things that, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's what I,
Okay, the next one is BDB, and it's, again, local, and it just determines the number and the terms and the responsibility, and it's pretty clear there. Any questions on that one? And then the next one is BDF, and that's separating board committees from citizen committees and really putting much more clarity on when you do them, when you have them. They even changed the title of the policy and separated them. So, and talked about how you can end committees that have citizens on it versus most committees are board committees. So it just separates that. It's pretty clear. Any questions on that? Okay, the next one is the EI local. This is something we already did as a district. This was a local policy we declared a long time ago, and it has to do with partial credit, and if you make a 70 and a 60 in a course, that you get partial credit for the 70, so we've been doing that for a long time, so. Then the next one is FDE, and again, we've done this. It's adding bullying to the safe and civil schools and making sure we're, kids, if they have been bullied or they've been a victim of any kind of abuse or sexual abuse, and that person is in the school, you can get a transfer. It's very clear, and that's been clear for a while, and we have had no schools declare unsafe and have not had to deal with this. So that's been there for a while. So then the next one is attendance, FEC, and this is an interesting one for us because we've had attendance committees for years, mostly at the secondary, intermediate, middle, and secondary level, where they're working with absences and whether they get credit if they come enough days. We've always had those committees. The principal has input in it, but they usually have a committee. And then we have to do seat time if they haven't come to school enough. They are releasing us of seat time. Now we can look at whether they've met the TEKS, and there's some beauty in that, and then there's not. So we have, administrators have a mixed view about that, but it's kind of nice, but it also was something that we could hold over people that helped them get some of the things done at the last minute. So, there you go. I was surprised to see that. Then FFAC is about whether we have respiratory distress, which is if we allow kids to have whether we have unassigned inhalers and that kind of thing. We do not, so that won't pertain to us. We do have unassigned EpiPens, and that's already been policy, but this is just looking at kind of the same thing with that with inhalers. So we are not recommending to do that. That's not something we're going to do. If we want it, we have to do something different. So, any questions?
Is the FEC local change, is that a legal requirement or?
It's a local requirement, but there's also a legal requirement with it that we've had in place, partially. Okay.
I guess my question is, because you mentioned, kind of the good and the bad of it. Is it something we could not adopt and keep the seat requirements, or?
Yes. Oh, I don't know. I'd have to look into that. I don't know.
Generally, when the recommendations come out with like major updates like this, we need to follow their guidance because the legal guidance is it needs to be updated. And some of these changes sometimes are a result of potential lawsuits, case studies, and then generally it's lacking in a year. And then everybody's playing catch up. So generally, this is trends that they've seen across the state that maybe, Penn District put them in a bad spot, and so they recommend the updates. I guess technically, you could say no, but then you're kind of exposing yourself to something that's happened somewhere potentially.
Dang lawyers.
You got to have the attendance committees, though, so those are good.
and it's a little question. So if they aren't required to be in the seats and we have to prove TEKS mastery, is that grades for high school kids? Or,
The committee can look at all kinds of unique, it's very spelled out in the long side of it. Every situation is unique, and the committee is now required to look at every unique situation. The committees already did that.
Right.
So it's kind of funny. I think part of the issue that this came up is because some school districts really weren't doing the committees as, with fidelity, and we've done that for a long time, so. That's my opinion. Yeah, it's always been a problem. Any
Anything else?
questions?
All good? Thank you. That brings us to adjourn.